This is Dr. Ho Nguyen and the Reverend Lang Lim. This is Pandamix, Healing Conversations in Between Times. In this episode, we will explore healing from the historical dimension. And so, Lang, how do we heal from a historical perspective? What does it mean to heal from our history?
Yeah, that's a good question, because it would seem that if you were to heal history, traumas of history, like the war you went through in Vietnam, it suggests like somehow we can go back into the past to do it, and that's obviously not possible. So what do we really mean by it? I think when we talk about history, people think about history as something you have either forgotten or you remember. And then if you remember it, you want it to be a proud thing. But I think that's not a helpful way to think about history. I think history is either repressed. It's there, but you repressed it, you deny it, and it seems like you've forgotten and it's over, but it's repressed. Or else, history is retrieved. You go back and you retrieve it.
Is it kind of like a remembering?
It's like a remembering, right? Or else it's released. It's been fully integrated and is released. Because history is something not just mine. Whatever history I have is often shared with you. And with you together, or with you against and apart, because it's something you've done to me or something your ancestors have done to me. And I think that if history is repressed and denied, it's not freedom, it's not liberation. Actually, what it is retained trauma. It's retained trauma. And I think if it is retrieved, like I think what the United States is going through right now over racism and slavery, then it's in this process of conflict, and is being disordered. The order is being disordered, and then eventually, when it's worked through, if it is worked through, then it is released. Then something, then it is understood, and however painful or otherwise, is usually many things, then it is remembered as something that can become a blessing.
Please take a breath with me. So what I'm hearing is, to heal from the history is to remember, to retrieve.
To retrieve. And you have to work at it.
What would you say to people that said, well, that already happened in the past, let's forget about it, let's move on, could we just forget and move on?
Well, there are other parties it's a good aspiration to move on. Usually comes from generally a good place to say, don't want to dwell in it, don't want to re-traumatize. But you've got to ask the other parties to the same history whether they are moving on or not. Because history is something we all share, and there is what I think of as dramas of traumas that we are part of. So when we think of the United States, for example, right, the trauma is there is a perpetrator, there are victims, and then there are bystander beneficiaries. Right? This is the drama. So if you are ready to move on, hey, if the victims are not ready to move on, as a group, you have not moved on. Just like in a family as well.
Yeah, so I would like to bring it closer to our personal experience, because sometimes when we talk about historical trauma from
a national perspective and all of that.
or
Yeah,
cultural
sure.
perspective, it's hard for some people.
Okay.
It's hard for me sometimes. But I could imagine, say, if I were to live and grow up in a family, and let's say, just make up this scenario where the father of the family is respectable, churchgoer, loving father. And let's say this father has 3 children,
Yes.
Susan, Peter, and Christina.
Okay.
So daddy is loving and
Yeah, generally
generally a good guy
Good guy.
in society, and we could see that.
Yeah.
But sometimes what happens is that daddy treats Susan in a particular way.
Yes.
Daddy then treats Peter and Christina in different ways.
Okay.
And so let's say Susan experienced daddy to be this perfect, he's loving, he's kind, he's generous, he's giving.
The
everything.
ideal of a
The
father
ideal.
for Susan. Yeah.
For some reason, Susan has this perspective of daddy.
And maybe a real lived experience. That's all
Possible.
that she experiences of daddy.
Let's assume that for a moment.
Great.
Then Christina, on the other hand, experienced daddy to be an alcoholic, abusive monster who molested her. Now, this is a secret in the family. Like the family people, we don't know whether who knows what.
Yeah, so let's be careful with the word "a secret" because it could really only be between the both of them, right? And then it's not just that Christina has a different experience, as if it's just her experience. It's her experience, but it's also a fact that daddy has molested her and has violated her. Then the question becomes for Peter, right? What does he do, assuming that he knows and he sees what's been going on? And if he says nothing, then it's a secret. If Christina, who's the one that's molested and violated, says something, and Peter, who knows, keeps it a secret, then this is being repressed and suppressed and denied, and Christina is being now traumatized a second time because her brother is keeping the secret, or the mother is keeping the secret. Right? So when this family starts talking about, if there's alcoholism, everybody experiences it in some ways, whether they recognize it or not. But the rape may be very private. So what happens to, so let's play this out. What happens to Susan? What happens to Peter? What happens to Christina?
Yeah, so Christina now verbally expressing her experience
Yes,
of being abused,
yes. Telling a story.
telling her stories. And Susan find it very painful and offensive and upset. How dare you say this about daddy? Because my experience of daddy is perfectly
Perfect.
generous and
Yeah.
perfect to me. And so there's an experience that Susan is having. She doesn't quite know what to do with this information about daddy. And her initial reaction, I could imagine, is, no, you should not
Very
say
natural.
that.
Yeah.
And oftentimes for someone in the family to speak up about an experience of abuse or trauma, oftentimes that person gets demonized as someone who kick up the shit in the family or
Yes.
expose something.
Yeah.
It's very dangerous for someone like, let's say, Christina, to open up.
Yes.
So the question I have is how in this situation, how would you see healing in this family system happen? Let's say begin with Susan and her relationship with her sister, Christina.
Well, first of all, healing here doesn't mean we then can go back to some belief of ourselves as a family that was perfect, you know. So healing means now you got to ride this roller coaster of dealing with this fact. So the hard thing for Susan is that Susan has been able to live in the happiness of naivete. She's not lying. You know, she got lucky not to have experiences of the part of her father. And so now being confronted by the fact that the father she knows is not the same father to her sister Christina, then the hardest thing for her is to be able to grow up. Grow up here means psychologically to know that your father is two-faced. That is really very hard.
There's complexity to the father.
No, there's complexity to yourself. Everybody is complex, right? Now you realize that your father is complex. Actually, your father is in fact more than complex, two-faced. There's a part that you generally experience to be good, and then now you have to consider this possibility that he's another part that has broken the law and that has done some vile things. Complexities for yourself now as Susan. How do you hold this in your mind? It has to do with yourself and your own great disillusionment and pain that you have essentially lost your father and your idealized father. So that's pain and grief and shame, right? And your own loss because you've lost the dad, the ideal dad in your heart and in your mind. You know. So for her, it's this growing up that, wow, the world has good and evil. Not the world. My world has good and evil, Dad. Peter's issue becomes, I have been a bystander. And I kept quiet for all sorts of complex reasons, right? You want to keep the family intact. You don't want to expose Dad. You don't want to expose Christina. This whole thing is just something really horrible. But you're maturing and you know the truth has to be faced into and spoken or recognized, at least for yourself. And so here is courage. I think what Peter needs is, well, they all need courage, but Peter's the particular thing of maybe to say, you know, I'm now ready and willing to look into the truth. And I might have not have been able to do that at 6 years old when I was witness to the alcoholism and the abuse. Now I'm 22. Time to do that. Because again, if it is repressed, the family as a whole is already suffering. You know, Christina's might be the easiest.
No.
In some sense. No, sorry, I don't mean easiest. I mean,
I don't think it's in a family system that has abuse and violation and trauma. It's not easy for anyone. It's difficult for everyone. And I think Christina, based on her experience, have to do her own healing work of her own shame, her own guilt, and so on. What I want to bring back to is what kind of relationship would Susan and Christina and Peter would like to have with each other?
That is a good family question. What is the kind of relationship they want with each other? What's the kind of family that they want?
And what kind of relationship do they want to have in relationship to the father? Because they have 3 different experiences of father.
And what relationship does the father want to have with this family? What do they all really want as a family unit? And we know that in some of these families they decide to split. but you bring up this analogy to talk about the United States and dealing with that history. You know, much harder to get out of a country because we are all in it together. So you're essentially saying, I think, by saying the father is so do you want to tell what is the analogy of the father as the rapist and provider?
This is somewhat of a loose metaphor, but I imagine the United States in this metaphor is the father. The father has been loving and kind to some and cruel and abusive to others. Then there's the bystander folks who protected themselves and didn't say anything. And so a lot of these family systems actually remain secret even to the members sometimes. But when things get revealed, it's very shocking to come to terms with, wow, this is, I thought the United States of America is this, and it actually has other dimensions.
This meaning?
You know, beacon on the hill, the American dream. I remember when I was in refugee camp in Thailand and imagining what would it be like to come to the U.S. And you know, as a teenager, I imagined what heaven would look like. You know, and I spent many years in the United States with.
But meaning heaven would be the United States.
Yeah.
That's what you mean.
Yeah, and that this is it's both truth and it's also a kind of marketing that many people around the world think of the United States. Right? It's this beautiful democracy with human rights and freedom and all of that. But many people either have chosen to forget or don't even know that the U.S. history is filled with horrible traumas.
That it has experienced and that it has inflicted on others. So that the United States, I think all countries have a bright side and then a vile side, you know. I mean, China was such a amazing civilization, and then it also had these cruelties, and you know, the Cultural Revolution. In Germany, for example, the seat of the Reformation, of Christianity, Beethoven, and then Hitler. But I think what is really hard of the United States is that of all the countries, I think it has the biggest gap. You know, meaning its achievements, you know, the daddy achievement is the brightest. I mean, we've sent someone off to the moon. No one else has. And then the vilest depths of it is genocide of 100 million Native Americans and the enslavement of Africans in order to create the economy and the society and to have the capital to lead to industrialization. So it has this biggest gap to bring together. And like I think Susan, who is trying to bring this gap of her father together, I think our fellow Americans who are confronting this history, and this history is being retrieved at this moment, are trying to close this gap. But I think the closing of the gap is an opportunity for really, really growing up. You know, if I think of myself coming to the US, you came as a refugee, I came as a very privileged foreign student with a scholarship to United World College, and then to Princeton, and then to Harvard. It was like, wow, you know, I could not have a more generous country or people give me a scholarship. My own government in Singapore would have given me a scholarship, and then I would have to work for them for 8 years. You know, in the United States, it was like, hey, here's the scholarship. Do with it whatever you want with your life. It was just astounding.
So you kind of like adopted to this family with a lot of
I was adopted
privilege.
into this family with a lot of privilege, and like, wow, I get to be a Susan and a Peter, and what have you? I mean, how lucky can I get? And then to observe, oh, this family has secrets, and indeed secrets, because you're not told when you come to the United States, or even actually when you apply for citizenship and have to study the tests, you're not asked any questions about Native Americans and African Americans, but you start seeing that this family behaves really weirdly with each other, and that there are griefs and pains and repressions that's retained. And so, I was a beneficiary, am still a beneficiary as a bystander to all this history, right? Not our history. And then we see it in what happens. Just the other day, I was just saying to my friend Mpo, I said, I feel so grateful to the US for this great gift, but then what do I do with this history? And she said, yeah, you can feel grateful, but it was not a gift. I said, what do you mean? She says, it was loot. And that's a historical fact, right? It was looted, and then turned into something beautiful, and then offered to me, to us all, as something, the opportunities, the wealth. And now I have to sit at this historically and go, I have personally benefited. I feel grateful. I have little against Southern white racist confederacy. And yet it was loot. It was loot. It is loot.
It's more than just looting. Looting and
looting is like an accident happened over, and then you just come and you take things from the empty store. This was really going in and
stealing and raping and
conquering,
destroying a group of people systematically.
Yeah. So I think, at least for us, the healing comes from the capacity to retrieve this memory, and we will do our work on what it means now to be a truly loyal American. I believe part of what we are doing is to speak these truths, both of gratitude and then to present to our fellow Americans, there's been this loot and this thievery. Let us work on this together, because if we retrieve, we have the possibility of releasing this. And so basically, I think the task is this, right? The victims are the heirs, to victims. They have to work with it themselves. African Americans, some are saying, I'm no longer a victim. Okay, good. And others saying, we are still suffering from this burden. Okay, I witness you, right? You do your work in your time. What has been bothering me is what do you say to the bystander and the beneficiaries, and what do you say to the perpetrators? And I cannot help but keep feeling how thick the anger is to be confronted with this history by white people or people of European descent who have benefited from this ideology called whiteness, as well as a whole lot of others who are not, but who would love to just have this thing be okay. And what they, who are our fellow brother and sister Americans, need to do, if you are the successors to the perpetrator class, and now you are bystanding, but all of us beneficiaries, really, of this early national creation, historical creation of the United States.
Let's take a breath together. What I'm getting from this conversation, that it is useful for me both from the perspective that you shared about the history of America, but I wanted to bring it to the family again, that in order for the family to have members of the family to have relationship with each other, Susan has to do her own work in a way reckoning that her father is not what she had perceived him to be.
Yes.
Then she also have to cultivate the capacity to bear witness and to be present to Christina and her pain and her
Yes.
sorrows.
Right. And her challenge then, I think, is between the ideal of the father and me that has been shattered, and that's painful, and is Christina my sister? And her challenge is, where is this love? Because the analogy to the national situation in the US is, if you have grown up with an innocent belief in the US, whether you're white or even black or Asian or another color, now that this has shattered, the piece now is what do you want to do with your African American brother and sister? You know, to hear their story.
I imagine that it's difficult for any family
Yes.
to look at sort of the painful, dirty secrets. And at the same time, it is essential if they choose to be in relationship with each other,
Yeah.
right? And so in this episode, we're gonna come to a close here. Please take a breath with us. In the next episode, we'll continue to deepen this conversation. What would it look like? How do we practice? How do we listen to each other in order to heal the family system, the historical aspects of the family, but also looking at the cultural and national traumas? Please take a breath with us.